the things that stop your employees being productive, you've probably never ever heard of. If you get interrupted and it breaks your train of thought, and statistically you will get interrupted once every 11 minutes, it takes you 22 minutes to get back to full productivity. If you are continually interrupted at work, it is the equivalent of a 10-point drop in your IQ, or as if you were working under the influence of marijuana.
Andrew Barnes is New Zealand entrepreneur and philanthropist known for founding and leading Perpetual Guardian,
managing over $4 billion in assets, including private wealth, philanthropy, and estate planning.
Barnes pioneered the 4-Day Week initiative, gaining international recognition.
We've now ended up speaking on this in 125 countries. How do you measure productivity? They're measuring time, and they're using time as a surrogate for productivity. Research says people are productive for 2.5 to 3 hours a day. They are working the whole time, but they're not necessarily productive. You are presupposing that every minute of every hour that you are in the office or you are productive. Is that true? Yes or no?
I think 90% true.
So you never made yourself a cup of coffee, and you never had a conversation with anybody that was interesting? When you walked through the door in the morning and you sat down...
How can you be 100% productive with 80% of the time?
If you can eliminate the things that stop you being productive. So, for example...
So, who are you? And what's your mission on this earth?
That's an interesting question. I mean, it's not something I think that I've ever specifically set out to do something. Most of the things that I've tried to do almost have happened by accident. If I look at the thing that arguably I'm better known for in recent years is the 4-day week. Now, I would view that as a fantastic chance to change the world. Did I set out to do that? No, I read an article in a magazine. I thought, well, that's interesting. Is that happening in my company? What if it is? What could I do about that? And therefore ran an experiment, not because I thought suddenly this would be... I think at the last count somebody said the global audience is about 5.5 billion people. It was actually, I just wanted to try whether this thing worked. The changing the world bit comes as an accident. But I think if you focus on what you can do well, if you focus on doing things in a way that as much as possible doesn't hurt other people and brings them up on the journey, then actually good things happen. If you take the alternative strategy, I don't think it does. So I think I'm an accidental evangelist for things that potentially benefit the world.
Where were you when you read that article?
I was on a plane.
Tell me about it.
I used to fly up and down to England to see my kids. Yeah. And I'm on a plane. I used to binge read The Economist because I never had time. So I used to get on the plane. I had 20 hours. I'd go read back-to-back copies of The Economist. Read The Economist, and it had this article on people being productive for 2.5 to 3 hours a day. And I thought, wow, if that's true, is that happening in my business? And I thought, I can see how it could be happening in my business. People are busy, but are they productive? So I wanted to test the hypothesis from that as to whether if I changed the dynamic. So I really said to people, look, if you can do what you need to do in less time, and I give you that additional time off, will that change behaviors? Will it change the way people do work? And that's what I wanted to test. Because, of course, if you are only productive for 2.5 hours a day or 3 hours a day, you only actually have to find 45 minutes of additional productivity in each of 4 days to make up for the 5th day. My thesis was that you would find more than 45 minutes, in which case productivity would go up. And that's what we found.
So you were literally curious to find out if something had worked, and you were just wanting to test it out in your own company.
That's right.
Not just we were like, oh, this could be a great idea.
Wasn't. I actually thought, genuinely, we were going to get, I don't know, a story in the local paper, because it was an interesting thing. And our people said, oh, look, yeah, the Herald might run something, or you might get on the Today Show or something. And what we did. We were on those things, didn't think any more about it. And then what we found was that I think it was the Guardian journalist in New Zealand picked up the story that was on the Today Show and in the Herald and wrote an article. The editor of the New York Times reads the Guardian. So the Guardian wrote this thing, the New York Times then picked it up, then the West Coast picked it up, and this thing suddenly exploded. So by the time when we did the first one, which was when we announced the trial, I think we stopped counting at around 12,000 global articles, podcasts, interviews. It was about 15,000 when we announced the results, and when we made it permanent, it was bigger than that again. And we've now ended up speaking on this in 125 countries. We've ran pilot programs all over the world, all from something that was literally me going, oh, I wonder if that's going to work.
Are you kind of like that in life? You test out some things as an entrepreneur and philanthropist?
Yeah, I think I do. I come from a family of artists. I am the freak of my family. Everybody else is eye-poppingly creative when it comes to the arts or using their hands. I used to get bored. We used to do sketching holidays when I was a kid. It used to drive me absolutely nuts. The last thing I really wanted to do is, sit somewhere drawing at something. My brother would be doing these very, very detailed things. I would get a big fat felt pen and very simple lines, draw something very quickly. But what I therefore have found is, bizarrely, my parents' creativity, obviously the bit that I've inherited, means that I think about business situations almost the way that you would construct a picture. So I'm using my artistic side to be creative, and because of that, it's the creativity that I find interesting. I wonder what would happen if, or what if we do this, or can we make that? And that's what motivates me. It's not so much the end goal, it's the creating something. And I'm lucky that some of the things that I do actually work, and if they work, then we'll make some money out of it, and if they don't, they don't. But it doesn't stop it being interesting.
But did you have that mindset when you were first starting about, oh yeah, I don't mind if it works? Because people in the beginning of their life, when they are, young or maybe a little bit older, they just want to make something work and make lots of money. In fact, money is what they're thinking about.
Look, I had very much a sea change in my own personal career, probably about when I turned 40. And I say that because I grew up in the northwest of England. My parents were ultra conservative with a small c. Very, they'd both come from a working class background. My dad's case, his father had died during the war, so I think he was 15 at the time, whereas my mum's father had generally been unemployed between the two wars. So they were very much about getting a job, a good job, but not taking any risks. And so I, again, more by accident than design, ended up in finance. But because I had this innate conservative streak. What I didn't do is actually go off and do things for myself. I wasn't an entrepreneur in the early days. But what I found I was doing is I would be constructing transactions usually for the organisation I worked for, which were very entrepreneurial. And it took me really until I was 40 when I actually said, hang on, I'm going to start doing this for myself rather than do this for the organisation for which I worked. But, along the way, I did some sort of really interesting things. And the thing that pushed me over the line was I actually bought and then floated a thing called realestate.com.au for the organisation for which I worked, which was Macquarie Bank. That, I think, to this day, is the biggest tech business ever to come out of Australia. It is now responsible for more than 70% of the total wealth of the Murdoch family. So you think of all the newspapers and things that they own, this one website is worth way more than that. And I bought that for Macquarie Bank, who I worked for in those days. And I could have bought it for myself. So I always say it's one of those moments where it could have been Bill Gates and then me. And, we try not to think about it or talk about it anymore because the numbers are, was it 20 billion or something? It's an enormous number that it's worth now.
So you are here now after all these years, and you've got this 4-day week phenomenon that's exploded around the world. Not hundreds of countries, but many countries and millions of people, and lots of people interested in the idea. But you started in finance, and it's crazy to think that you started in finance, but yet you're here. Like you were saying, like things happen by accident. I want to understand the 4-day week. It happened by accident, but it's become your mission now. Mm-hmm. And I guess the question is, why do you think it took off?
Oh, look, I think that's quite clear to me, at least. If you look at society today, the one thing that we are all lacking is time. Now, that could be because we've got more things that have interrupted our day. So technology is a classic example. Once upon a time, you used to get a couple of letters. Now you get hundreds of emails. That absorbs a whole pile, not just of your work time, but of your downtime. You've got the way in which social media also impacts work time and downtime. You have an environment where once upon a time in a family, one member of the family would work, one member of the family would look after the children, deal with all of those bits and pieces of family admin. Mm-hmm. Now it's necessary usually for both parents to work. Therefore, everything is being squeezed into either limited amounts of free time, or it's just not being done, or you're actually paying people to do it, which in turn then places pressure on a family because you've now got to earn more to pay the person to do the thing that otherwise you would previously have done. So I think wherever you are in the world, and it doesn't matter which culture you're in, which is the key point, being time poor is universal. So because we are time poor, you then say, right, if somebody gives me the opportunity to have more time, that actually is very, very attractive. The reasoning why I think this has really exploded is that at the same time as that, we didn't just focus on this work-life balance component. That's what matters to the employee. But actually from the employer's perspective, just giving you more time off doesn't achieve anything for them. So it was bringing these two things together that said, look, if you rethink how you work, that's not just process, that's environment. It's also about attitude. If that can all change so that you can do the work more efficiently, and the benefit of that goes to the employee because you in the company are getting higher productivity anyway, then everyone wins. And we know from our research that the employee values the time they get off at a higher price than the price it's being paid for through salary.
Why is that?
Don't know, but it is true. So if we did from the American trial onwards, we've run trials now in about 20 countries worldwide. So from the American trial, which is about trial 3, we used to ask people, how much would we have to pay you to go back to working 5 days a week? And this data then became quite consistent. So the important thing is we've asked this question country after country, different cultures, first world and developing world. And it is broadly about 15% say you can't pay me enough to go back to 5 days. About another 15% will say 75% more. About 40% will say it will have to be 50% more. So we do see this data is quite clear. Actually being given the time off that matters to you is highly motivating. And that, of course, is what makes the 4-day week work. Because if I'm valuing the time I get off higher, actually that's what keeps me, driving and striving to do it. Because if I go back, all you're ever going to do is pay me a bit more for working 5 days a week, and actually that's not worth as much to me.
I wonder about why people value it more. That is actually interesting, and perhaps you might do a bit more research in your work to discover the reason why people value taking time off. So how helpful has it been to think about, like, when you were implementing that in your business, what was the response from your employees at the start?
Shock. In fact, if you can actually see the announcements because somebody filmed it, and what you got was this stunned silence. Because I have a terrible reputation for coming off planes and going, I've got a great idea. So I had this great idea and said, right, I want you to work only 4 days a week. Now, of course, the immediate reaction from the team was, oh my God, he's cutting our salaries. We're going to work 4 days a week. That's not going to be good. And I said, but you will then be paid for 5. Silence. And then a little bit of a nervous laugh. Because I think everybody thought that was radical. Remember, this is COVID. So pre-COVID, we're operating very conventionally. Most people went into the office 5 days a week.
And what was your work, if people don't know?
We run New Zealand's largest statutory trust company. So think...
simple terms.
It's about a law firm linked to a investment management business linked to a bit of a bank.
Okay.
If you can imagine all of those pushed together. We manage wills and we manage trusts. Quite often for charities, we will manage the funds. We will often distribute those funds. We've been around since the 1880s. So we are very much a traditional but long-standing New Zealand business. And
how many employees did you have?
We have about 300.
At the time? Of
300
launching?
spread across 16 offices.
Wow. Okay, so quite large.
And we have call centres, we have retail branches, we have all sorts of bits and pieces which everybody will tell you can't possibly do this because you've got to open the business. The key premise here is it is what we call the 100-80-100 rule: 100% pay, 80% time, 100% productivity. That does not mean that everybody takes Friday off, or Monday off. We have people who will take a day off. We have people who take 2 half days off. We have parents, often working parents, who would like to work 5 days a week but compressed hours. So coming back to why do people want this?
Yeah.
It's because you're giving the time off that is important to them. That's what makes it work, and that's the difference. If I give you, pick a day, Wednesday off, and you've got kids at school, doesn't really move the dial. But actually enabling you to take your kids to school at 5 days a week and pick them up 5 days a week without having to put them in childcare or anything, that actually is worth a lot more to you. So the thesis here is about giving people the time off that is important to them. And because of that, that means it's a higher value. What it also means is they use the time to do the things that matter to them. So we also do research on what people do with the time.
What do they do?
And it's largely family-based. It's largely spending time with the family or cooking more or volunteering or getting fit. I mean, it's very basic stuff, but it's stuff that actually improves the well-being of either the individual or their family or both. And again, that's why it's so valuable. If you feel better about yourself, your life is better. And bizarrely, going out on a limb here, if you're healthier and happier, you're likely to be more engaged at work and you're likely to be more productive at work.
All right, you guys, I want to tell you about one resource that I look into and check all the time. It's helped me in my own business journey, and it's made me a better business owner, a better podcaster, helped me stay on top of all the business news that are happening in New Zealand. It's called NZ Business Magazine. It's one of the New Zealand's oldest and most trusted sources for business stories, insights, and analysis for SME owners and leaders. So we've partnered together to help bring these kind of conversations like this one to more Kiwi entrepreneurs across New Zealand. So if you want to stay on top of what's happening in business, visit nzbusiness.co.nz today. Hello, thanks for watching this video. Quick note, have you subscribed? Over 90% of people who are watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify or on Apple are not subscribed or following. Please do so now. It's so simple. The button will be around the screen somewhere. You either hit subscribe or hit the follow button or leave me a review. It will help me so much, helps me grow as a channel and support my work. So I really appreciate it. Okay, back to the episode. What were the factors that improved with the 4 hour week? 4 days, sorry, I keep saying 4 hour week.
Everything improves. I mean, it shouldn't, right? It shouldn't. And people don't believe me, but remember, I don't get paid for marketing 4-day weeks. I talk about it because it is the best thing I've ever done in my business career, bar none. Because what it does is make my own business good, but it makes all the businesses good. On average, productivity goes up about 30%. You will find that sick days halve. You'll find engagement scores are going up 30-40%. You will find that staff turnover drops. You'll find it's easier to recruit people and retain them. So as a consequence, it's really, and again, it's quite an interesting counterintuitive methodology. It got the rocket fuel because of COVID. Because COVID, suddenly we said, one, I don't need to be in the office. Secondly, if you're not in the office, you had to measure productivity. So if I'm sitting in front of a business leader 9 times out of 10 and I say, look, 4-day week, they will do one of two things. One, they'll say, won't work in my industry. Actually, and then you go, well, actually, I know what industry you're in, and yeah, there is a company that's doing it precisely in your industry. Yeah. The second thing they will do is they'll turn around and say, but how do you measure productivity? And that's interesting because what that means, in effect, that they're not measuring productivity. They're measuring time, and they're using time as a surrogate for productivity. Now, while it wasn't universal, COVID forced businesses to start to measure productivity as opposed to the time. They couldn't count or see the person in the office or the factory. They had to be able to measure what they did. So when you put those two things together, that's what I think gave the 4-day week movement a little bit of rocket fuel, because a lot of people then said, actually, now I can measure this. I can actually see if it works.
Do you think without COVID it would have taken off?
Yeah, I think it probably wouldn't have been quite as quick. I mean, you know, as we sit today, what have we got? We have got probably about 5 countries in the world that have actually brought it in across the board. We have seen legislation probably in another 10 to 15.
Well, if you look at the countries that have been implementing this, which country has actually gone
the furthest?
Well and first and like open to you and
bizarrely, you've got Iceland. They did it very early. The UAE have done it. Now, I mean, these are not countries that you would instantaneously go, well, of course it's going to be in the Middle East that will do it. I mean, that would have been probably the very last country. But bizarrely, it's not, because what is happening here is people are looking at the problems that the world faces. Now, that is social, it's environmental. There's demographic problems. So there are all sorts of different problems around the world. Now, I have a thesis that says when you distill all of them, a lot of them are linked to this question of lack of time. So if I am in Japan, for example, Japan, the municipal government in Tokyo is bringing in a 4-day week. They're bringing in a 4-day week because they've got a declining birth rate. And their view is that because people spend all of this time in the office, they don't have a chance to meet a partner. They don't have the time to run a family. And so the net result of that is, as work is the dominant feature, they don't have kids. That is a time bomb that's ticking away in Japan. So they're trying this to see if it changes the birth rate. In Saudi Arabia, by contrast, the biggest amount of unemployment amongst graduate educated individuals, young people, is women. And why? Because it's traditional society, and therefore people think that actually you have to the family dominates, and the woman is broadly going to be the person that has to do with that. As a consequence, you're not using the resources that you could have from this educated cohort. So by changing it to a 4-day week, you're enabling a conservative country that is focusing on the female being the primary carer to have time to balance the two competing demands. So I use those as examples that you've got two differing things. South Africa, it's youth unemployment, therefore you could do job share.
This is like bigger countries. Have you seen, or have you seen like the smaller countries?
Well, Iceland is one of the first to do it with a population of, I think, about 330,000. All the way up to, I mean, it predates the war, but way back when we first did this, I was driving the Peking to Paris car rally with my partner, Charlotte. So this is 2018. And we'd just done the 4-day week. And we were in the back of, I'm going to say we were in Siberia somewhere. Phone rings in the car. And it's one of the team from New Zealand said, do you realise you've just been name-checked by the Prime Minister of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev? And I said, Why? He said, well, he's seen what you've done with Perpetual Guardian and the 4-day week, and he thinks it's the future for Russia. Okay. So we drive on, we're driving on a little bit more. The phone rings again. He said, where are you? We're in Siberia. Oh, okay. Where are you going? Well, we're heading to Novosibirsk, which is a flippin' town you've never heard of in the far end of Russia. Okay. When are you going to get there? Well, I don't know, probably about 4:30 this afternoon. Okay. Phone went down again. Then they called back and said, right, there are TV crews coming in from Moscow. And we arrived in, and I did 4 interviews back to back for prime time Moscow television on the 4-day week. And as we were leaving Russia a couple of weeks later, they announced they were drawing up legislation to bring in a 4-day week. Now, got overtaken a little bit by the war, right? And COVID and all sorts of things. In their case, it was exactly the same thing as we're seeing in South Africa. It was youth unemployment, and they were trying to work out how they could potentially create a structure that would enable them to deal with that particular problem. So you've got it from countries the size of Russia all the way down to Brazil is equally quite advanced in doing trials. Down to countries as small as Iceland. It is irrelevant, really, I think, the size of the country. It is irrelevant as to whether it is developing or non-developing. The premise remains the same. Time is a key driver, but then there are other social issues that you could say, well, actually, we can address those if we change and rethink the way we work.
Did you reach out to these people and tell them, hey, by the way, we're doing this and this, why don't you write about us? Or did they discover you? I'm wanting to go to the inception of how this
No, I mean, you always have to. I mean, this was always going to be something that we felt that we were doing when we thought less we'll tell. We'll see, it's a special interest story. You've got to think about what we were trying to do there was not promote the 4-day week. It was an interesting article about our company.
About the company.
A company, because Perpetual Guardian is, as I said, it's a long-standing 1882 foundation. And it was its brand is a relatively new brand, because what I did was I was bringing together old established trust companies and creating something that was new and dynamic. So we had Perpetual Trust and we had New Zealand Guardian Trust, and we created this Perpetual Guardian brand. Now, people have heard of companies like Public Trust, so the government-owned competitor to us. We were trying to improve the profile of the organisation, but also what I wanted to do was demonstrate that even in a very staid industry, there could be fresh thinking, and therefore our approach was not traditional. Now, that then flows, if our approach to the way we employ our staff is not traditional, then the way in which we approach dealing with a client's problems isn't necessarily traditional, and new thinking and new ways of doing it. So a little bit of that is about, we were just doing a simple PR story on the 4-day week as a thing that would give us a bit of promotion for Perpetual Guardian. The fact it then blew up globally came as an almighty shock, because in fact I was due to be in a meeting, and I literally was dragged out by the team and said, look, we've got, I forget which country on the end of the phone, but we have this one on. And I literally finished that interview, and there were people standing around in the office with phones in their hands. They would take one phone off and hand me another one.
Wow.
And then we were just literally doing back to back to back to back interviews. It was extraordinary. And that, I think, indicates
Demand.
the demand. We were the second most read story in the New York Times after the Trump-Putin summit. I mean, there was a Jim Jeffries, the Australian comedian. There was a Jim Jeffries skit on our 4-day week.
Wow.
I mean, it was incredible what was happening.
Do you think like you are one of the few people in the world who have contributed to innovating the way we live in the 21st century, away from the Industrial Revolution and now into this digital age, the info age, and the AI age, and the post-COVID age? Is this like all meant to happen, right?
Look, I can't say I'm one of the only or the few. I think your point is, however, well made. The 5-day week is a construct of the very early 20th century. Henry Ford is often given credit for the introduction of the 5-day week. And no doubt there were a whole bunch of people, bewhiskered individuals running factories, who all thought the end of the world was coming when we dropped from 6 days a week to 5 days a week. And I'm pretty sure the same people were worried when we dropped from 7 to 6. Now, Henry Ford did that to create a market for his cars as much as anything else. You didn't need to own a car if you only had a day off a week, because you'd be going to church. But if you got a weekend off, actually you could take the kids to the beach on one day, so you needed to get there, so hey, have a car, right? So there's a little bit about that. We have not evolved the way we have worked since he introduced the 5-day week. So that's over 100 years ago. Yet, we have seen in the same period of time the impact of, technology, AI, the ability to use, to communicate digitally in a way which we couldn't do in those days. Why is it that we have seen revolution in almost everything that we do, other than we have decided that the pinnacle of human achievement when it comes to designing the way we work is a construct of the early 19th century and repetitive manufacturing industry? That makes no sense to me. And I think it goes to the heart of the fact that all too often the debate has been captured by the work-life balance component as opposed to the productivity component. I think that thinking about how you make people perform optimally in the digital age requires you to rethink. I know that if I'm doing manual labour, tiredness will stop work at a point. If we're in the digital creative age, actually it's mental tiredness that stops you being effective. So the thesis here is, how do you re-engineer the way we work so that in fact you get clarity of thought and you get you're more better rested, and therefore you are fresher, and therefore you can again work more creatively. So again, come back to this. If you've got lots of data coming in from all sides, it's very difficult to concentrate. Why have you got lots of data coming in from all sides? Well, because I haven't got time to compartmentalize the things that are coming in. I've got family, I've got some personal stuff, I've got to try and track down this plumber, I've got all of that plus business stuff coming through, and therefore my brain
juggling too
is
much.
juggling. There's a great statistic, and it's to do with being interrupted, but now that can be interrupted by a person or a message or something, that if you are continually interrupted at work, it is the equivalent of a 10-point drop in your IQ or as if you were working under the influence of marijuana. Now, that's what we're doing. Again, what I'm saying is stop that, change the way you construct your work environment, have quiet hours, don't have things that cause those interruptions. Can be somebody having a personal call on the adjacent desk to you, which is way more interesting than the report you're writing. If you change a few things, what you will actually get is you get more focused activity. More focused activity is more productive activity. And because it's more productive, the company performs better. It's not hard.
Different industries operate differently. So you would have a brick and mortar industry. You can have work at home, pharmacy versus a lab versus whatever. Have you tested every industry and they all work? Or are they like ones that
clearly
don't work?
we haven't tested out absolutely every industry, but to put things in context, Unilever have run the 4-day week. Panasonic have run the 4-day week. Volkswagen build cars on a 4-day week. We have everything from tech companies that do it, professional service firms, even lawyers, for heaven's sake, who are traditionally time-based. It's worked. Down to retail shops. One of my personal favourites is there's a fish and chip shop in Norfolk that went on to a 4-day week. Probably the most famous fish and chip shop in the world as a consequence, because when they announced it, literally every television crew from around the world that was in England at the time went to buy fish and chips.
Why is that?
Because they was the story. It was a great story. Here is the fish and chip shop doing the 4-day week. The 4-day week was interesting.
Right.
We've all gone out to Norfolk to this fish and chip shop. So,
Yeah.
the reality is what it is not. I'm not saying that what works for me, you will do exactly what I do. You won't. You will structure it in a different way. And how you do that is because you involve your employees in how it is constructed. In other words, you are asking them, what is it that prevents them from being as productive as they might be? Now, I'll give you another example. We have a construction, I think it's plumbing actually, business. And what they were doing is they found that obviously there are some aspects of the job which is, I'm trying to change a tap or whatever. That has a defined time. But what was interesting was that the way they logged the work at the end of the day was highly inefficient. So actually their plumbers were spending a long time filling in paperwork. Now, by changing the way they did the paperwork, that saved a chunk of time. And they handed that time back to the guys and said, right, you've got more time off. Because obviously the work that they were doing hadn't changed. But it was the amount that was eating into a bit of the work time, but also they were having to pay a bit of overtime in order to actually get this stuff done. Now, the team were happier because they weren't doing all of this rubbish. And as a consequence, more engaged, more going, oh, thank God, I don't have to do that at the end of the day. As a consequence, they found their productivity went up. And they found it was easier to again attract and retain good quality staff. And if they were keeping good quality staff, then they performed better than poor quality staff. And if they had a full complement of people working, they weren't having to say, well, I'm sorry, we can't take that job on because we haven't got somebody available to do it. So a lot of this is about thinking about business in the macro, not the micro. What is it that I need to look at in the round about my organisation, and how can I use this to change everything about how the company operates?
Have you applied this anywhere and it completely flopped? And it went... Like,
No.
terrible.
No. I mean, the data is broadly consistent. About 95% of
Success.
organisations that do the 4-day week trial retain it.
Have you got the number of how many organisations have taken it up?
You can't do that
Can
now
you?
because all we've ever done is we run our own trials. But now if you look around the world, there are 4-day week campaigns as a consequence of our work in, I would say, 20, 30 countries. There are people now who are just picking this up and running with it, because what we've done, and it's sort of great that it's a thing that's come out of New Zealand here, is that we have made it normal to talk about this. We haven't made it normal for it to be adopted, but the 4-day week is now an established business strategy. You may not agree with it, you may not want to implement it, but you've heard of it, and you are prepared. A lot of organisations are prepared to debate it, even if governments sometimes are, for it or against it. Interestingly, the UK government, so a Labour administration, is anti the 4-day week. How the hell did that happen? Whereas you will find elsewhere, that it is funny, but again, it's possibly because most of the people in the Labour administration in the UK have never run a business. So from their point of view, they're mostly lawyers. They think in terms of time, not output. Possibly.
So in order for you to be adaptive to this idea, you do need to be pro-people, but also pro-business.
Yes.
It's two different.
Yes, you have to be, because I think all too often, and I think possibly this is why the UK campaign is not as effective as it might have been, is that the people who really we did the trial in the UK, but the people who really pushed it along were very much coming from the workers' rights position. Now, I've never come from that position. I'm unashamedly a businessman. I come at this from the premise of saying I think it makes the business better. Now, because of that, your resistance to the adoption of the idea, it doesn't get stymied at the boardroom or the shareholder level or the chief executive level, because what you're saying is the evidence suggests that this works. And it does make the dynamics of the company better. Now, because of that, companies will introduce this, and companies will investigate whether it's worthwhile doing it. If all it is a campaign that says let's reduce the number of hours, that is not necessarily going to address the productivity gaps that we have, and it's not necessarily going to help business. I say to someone the other day, there is a great experiment that proves this, and it's called the French. So France introduced a 35-hour week. Now, initially a bit of a spike in productivity, but then, of course, it becomes the norm. And therefore everything just drops back, noting that it's now a 35-hour week.
How can you stop that happening in the 4-day week?
Well, how you do it is quite simply, it's not a change to your contract terms. So, for example, we've been doing it now for 6 years. Your contract of employment is 5 days a week, 38, 39 hours. What you then do is as an individual, you opt into the 4-day week policy. And the 4-day week policy, in essence, says, we, the organisation, will gift you an additional 40 days off a year, provided that we are getting the output that we have agreed we would expect from the 5-day week. This is the 100-80-100 concept.
Right.
If we don't get that, we have the right to cancel the 4-day week policy. So there is a dynamic tension here between the policy and the fact that all sides have got to honour this. The employee has to honour it by delivering the productivity. If the productivity is delivered, the company will honour the policy as well. So it doesn't ever become the norm. Now, the trouble is that our legislation often tries to make things the norm. And that is one of the problems with New Zealand legislation. It sort of says, after a while, if you're only working 30 hours, that's what your working week is. Now, the minute you do that, that stops the tension. As a consequence, the policy might not work. So bizarrely, we have legislation often in place that precludes us from adopting better work practices. Bizarre, but true.
What have you done about it?
Well, we lobby government, and, you know, at the moment, because the government here doesn't really believe in it.
No?
No.
Why not?
Well, because New Zealand generally doesn't believe in it. New Zealand's very bizarrely, given it came from here, New Zealand has not really adopted it at all. Now, a bit of that, I think,
that's really sad.
It is, but I think it's possibly a construct of a couple of things. Many companies in New Zealand are very small. We are a country with lots and lots and lots of very small businesses. I think there is a statistic somewhere that says there's only about 1,000 companies that employ more than 100 people. Yeah. So because we are a nation of small businesses, actually, potentially that's one reason. But I think also New Zealand is very much what I would call the first follower, in that we like to invent things, but quite often we don't necessarily exploit them. And therefore...
It's a bit useless, isn't it?
It is, but I think there's a little bit of that, right? And so meanwhile, you look across the ditch in Australia, and there is quite strong adoption in Australia. And interestingly, at a political level, the Senate Select Committee on Work and Pensions there actually came out in support of a 4-day week. And that was by no means dominated by one side or another. That was very much a cross-party view. Because the data, I mean, we are very data-driven. We've always done lots of research alongside the trial. Even when we did our own experiment, we had University of Auckland and Auckland University of Technology doing the research. So we've got objective data from, you know, some of the leading academics in the world who've run alongside the pilot projects that we've done, and we have qualitative and quantitative data on the outputs. And that actually is quite important, because I'm not asking business leaders to just take my word for it. What I'm saying is go have a look at the data, have a look at what has come out of these trials, and draw your own conclusions as to whether you think you can make it work in your business. And if you can, give it a go. Do a trial, because we think that the benefits to business are material.
Is it not because it's small businesses exist in New Zealand? That's why we are struggling to implement.
Possibly, like because if you've got a husband and wife working, but you're already doing probably flexible working. Some days weeks you're going to work every hour. God sends, and other weeks you're not. You're going to go to the beach, right? But so there's probably a bit of it. Yeah. Probably a bit of it relates to the type and size of the business, and also therefore if it's a family business, you're not necessarily sitting down and saying, I need to motivate my employee. If your employee is you, your partner, your kids, your parents, you know, actually motivation comes from a different angle in those things.
Which I was going to bring me to the next question is, how do you or is it possible to use this technology or way of thinking or way of living or way of doing work with entrepreneurs, like someone who's an entrepreneur, solo entrepreneur? Many of these people are in New Zealand. Can you do a 4-day week?
Well,
given the fact that lots of well-established entrepreneurs say there is no such thing as work-life balance at the start of the business.
Well, it's an interesting problem, right? So what you've got to recognize is that a business owner has a different risk-reward equation to an employee. So, I mean, I would argue I am an entrepreneur, right? But I own the capital in the business. So if it really goes well, then I do very well. So let's look at some tech entrepreneurs here. Well, you know, we've got Rocket Lab. You know, owner's done well out of that one? I would think so. Halter, do you think they've done well out of that? Yeah. So, of course, those individuals inevitably will work broadly all the time because they are building an asset for them. Now, if they can work on their own all the time with nobody to help them, then that's a very valid strategy. But it doesn't work like that, does it? Because you've then got to employ people. And people who aren't given those same rewards actually are motivated in different ways. The average employee wants a decent life, a decent wage. They want to bring up their kids in a good way. They want to have a nice holiday. They are not motivated Elon Musk style to be a trillionaire. They know they're not going to be that. So as a consequence, you have to then say, how do I deal with that? Now, if you look at organizations like Alphabet or Apple, what they did is they did a strategy that said, we are going to give an employee this fantastic place to go where there is food, dry cleaning, games equipment. And what they were basically saying is, I'm going to give you all of these baubles, but you spend every hour and every second in the office to make me rich. That's what they did. That's their strategy. And maybe that motivates a particular type of person. You will find, however, in all sorts of other companies, that is not the case. That actually you could achieve the same thing by motivating the staff, by giving them a better balance in terms of work time and downtime. Now, even in the Alphabets of this world, they then turned around and said, actually, we'll let you spend 20% of your time on your own project. Huh? Okay, so you're working 4-day week. Maybe long hours, but you are basically taking a punch of time and saying, we don't want it. Often the conversation is exactly the same. You may be achieving it in slightly different ways. And so what we found is that quite a lot of tech startup businesses have actually started on a 4-day week. Because there's a shortage of skills. There is the need to attract and retain people. You've got a situation that maybe you can't pay quite as much as that big company down the road. How can I compete? Change the philosophy of how we work, and that means I can compete.
So what has been the most well-known companies in the world that have adopted your ideology?
Well, Unilever, Volkswagen, Panasonic, I think Lamborghini.
That's cool.
You know, and then obviously a number of countries.
Are you trying to crack into the well-known tech companies?
No, I'm not trying to crack into anything.
No.
All I am is a guy who's sitting here saying, I came up with this really silly idea. It worked. I couldn't literally drink enough cups of coffee with business leaders around the world. I didn't have enough time because I actually have a business to run. So I then wrote a book. Books translated into Portuguese, Spanish, French, Danish, Vietnamese, something else and something else and something else. So that people can get the book. We created the 4-day week podcasts and the Global Foundation, primarily because we thought, you don't get many chances to change the world. Let's talk about it. But you know what? I don't make any money out of selling 4-day weeks. I do not need to crack any business anywhere. It's of no interest to me to do that. All I want to do is to say to business leaders around the world, through a variety of different sources, actually, why don't you think about this? And why do I want that to happen? Because I think that if we are going to address the big issues that we face, environmental, for example, a 4-day week in the UK would be the equivalent of taking the entire UK private car fleet off the road every year. You don't even need to worry about whether you're mucking around with electric cars or XYZ. You literally could have achieved more by changing the way that we worked. If we take 20% of cars off the road in Auckland, we would get free flow. If we got free flow, that would put 1.5 percentage points on our GDP. So that would improve business. What you're finding is that in health terms, that we have got a health crisis. We've got a health crisis that 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people have a stress or mental health issue, right? Okay, why is that? Because often it's driven by time. So actually, if you could deal with that, that would have a massive benefit. Something like the benefit to the UK, because we've done quite a bit of work there, is that I think the cost of sick days in the UK is such that if the data was translated across the country, i.e. sick days halve, it would benefit the UK economy by £45 billion a year. Now that is more broadly than all these tax rises and savings that the current Labour administration there is doing, but they could do it just by changing the way they work. Don't need to do all of this other stuff. And that is the point here. The 4-day world will deal with a lot of our current problems.
There's another guest that have been on my show who talks about the work school hours. I don't know if you're aware of it. And it sounds a bit similar to what you're inventing.
Well, I'm not inventing anything. I'm literally, but it's the same concept, exactly.
Innovating in a different way.
Work school hours is no different from a 4-day week.
It's the same issue, right?
Yeah,
and
it's the same thing.
There's a book about it, just trying to be out there, Dr. Ellen Ford.
Yeah, because it's the same thing, which is why we say some of our staff who have kids, they work 5 days a week, but reduced hours, which enables them to do the school run, it enables them to do the pickup, it means they don't have to have childcare, and as a consequence that works better.
How can you be 100% productive with 80% of the time? Like, does it mean that you're going to go crazy for those 4 days?
No, because you are presupposing that every minute of every hour that you are in the office or you are productive. Is that true? Yes or no?
Oh, when I used to work in the office,
yeah.
I think 90% true.
All right, so you never went and made yourself a cup of coffee?
No, the 10% would be the coffee.
Wait a minute. And you never had a conversation with anybody that was interesting? When you walked through the door in the morning and you sat down and you opened up you had a look at the newspaper or anything, you didn't actually do that. You actually instantly walked through the door, put that down, never looked at it again, right? Or did you actually, whenever your phone pinged and you thought, well, I wonder who that is, and had a look, right? Now, if you get interrupted and it breaks your train of thought, and statistically you will get interrupted once every 11 minutes, it takes you 22 minutes to get back to full productivity. So even if you think you are productive, the reality is you are either not, or you are not as optimally productive as you might be. And this is not my research. This is very well established research. It was this stuff that got me on the journey in the first place.
Right.
When do you sit, if you're eating your lunch at the desk, right? And the person next to you is going, God, that's a reheated curry. It's fabulous. And, am I hungry? Of course I'm hungry. And you think about it. There are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of little things that creep into your day that you don't really necessarily recognize are actually impacting on your productivity. And that is why research says people are productive for 2.5 to 3 hours a day. They are working the whole time, but they're not necessarily productive. So all we say is, if you can eliminate the things that stop you being productive, and that's this, if you're only productive for 3 hours a day, I only need to find 45 minutes of additional productivity in 4 days, each of 4 days to make up for the 5th day. If I can change a few things around, what happens is I can improve productivity. So, for example, a quiet hour. You can put your headphones on, you can't be disturbed, and no one can come and interrupt you for an hour. Now, because statistically you would get interrupted once every 11 minutes and it would take you 22 minutes to get back to full productivity, an hour where you are not interrupted is the equivalent of approximately 3 hours of true productivity. Now, I've not changed a damn thing. All I've done is I've changed the way in which you work. And as a consequence, in fact, you can be, and that's what the evidence shows us, 33% more productive in 4 days rather than 5, with stress levels dropping. People are better able to do their job working 4 days rather than 5. It shouldn't work, everybody tells me, but it does. And that's the genius of it, because everybody wins.
It's incredibly profound to know that New Zealand hasn't done much of an uptake on it. And if you would have a message to any manager listening to this, or an employee listening to this, or whoever is able to maybe implement change in their own language, what would that be?
Well, why wouldn't you? See, I could be wrong.
You can test it. What could go wrong with testing?
What's the worst that can happen, right? If you think about it, I'm only ever asking people to run a trial. Now, if you're right, you can sit there at the end of the trial and say, Andrew, we tried it, didn't work.
Yep.
Now, your employees, though, are going to turn around and go, well, actually, at least they gave it a try. It didn't work in our company, but maybe we found some interesting stuff out about this. But you know what? At least the boss gives a damn. He thought he'd give it a go, or she'd give it a go, right? So nobody loses. But if you don't try it, what is your worst nightmare? Your worst nightmare is your biggest competitor does it first.
I love that. What has been some of the challenges of implementing this? Have you seen maybe...
Don't overthink it.
That's good.
If you overthink this...
What's the overthinking here?
Well,
what are we thinking
I'll give you
about?
an example. There was a business in the UK, it's a charity called the Wellcome Foundation. And the Wellcome Trust decided that to great fanfare, they announced that they were going to do the 4-day week. And so they then went on a process of analysing how they could do it. And they came up after, I think, 2 months or 3 months of research. They hadn't even tried it. With the earth-shattering conclusion that people are less productive on a Friday afternoon. Who'd have thought? And as a consequence, they didn't ever implement it. So they spent all their time overthinking how they might structure it from a head office perspective, and then never ever tried it. So they don't know to this day whether it would have worked. So our advice to any business is quite simply, don't overthink this. Actually, the things that stop your employees being productive, you've probably never, ever heard of. Because when you do a conventional process re-engineering strategy, you bring in some consultant from somewhere who says, oh, if we cut that out and cut that out and cut that out, I can get rid of that employee. So what your employees hear, quite simply, is you want me to do more with less. So, in order to stop that happening, I don't tell you about the efficiencies in my day. Why would I do that? Because if I tell you about those, you might then decide, okay, well, we'll cut this and cut that. Now, when in fact the impediment to an employee getting a 4-day week is that inefficiency, they tell you about it. And these can often be very small. But remember, I don't need much. I need to find, statistically, 45 minutes of additional productivity. So something that's impacting me 15 minutes in every day broadly has you halfway there. It's really quite simple.
Do you help people implement this in the workplace, or do you have a team that does that?
Look, these days I don't do. Once upon a time we did. We actually had a bigger team, which we still were actively part of. Now the 4-day week global is there. They will help you. It is a not-for-profit, effectively. You can go to the website, you can reach out to them, they will help. You can either use the materials that are on the website, or if you need consulting, then they will help you with that. But, there's a lot of material. Read the book. The book is... I wrote the book purely to be a very practical tool for business to think about the issues. It's not a particularly long book, but it walks through the things that we did and why we did them and what worked and what didn't work and what are the hurdles that you have. But it's not the hardest thing in the world. You're offering something fabulous to your employees that is likely to motivate them to work with you, because everybody wins. You win, your business is better, they have more time.
Did you make more money after the 4-day week, after it's been implemented in your business? Was it like revenue-wise? What's the revenue like?
Well, we are now on a per capita basis today. We are twice as productive as our nearest competitor. So we are operating using the 4-day week, and we are getting twice the output of our nearest competitor per individual.
Your competitors are not implementing this?
Correct. So this is the competitors who are not implementing this. They do exactly the same things as we do.
And you're twice as...
we are twice as productive. A lot more profitable, by the way. Massively more profitable. But we are, if you just look at revenue...
Who's more profitable?
We are generating twice as much revenue per individual as they are.
Exactly like the money generated by the one employee, right?
That's right.
So you're making more money out of the employee?
Yes, we are. And they are having more time off.
And you're paying them for a whole day. They're not working, pretty much.
Correct. I'm never paying them. Nobody ever pays for the day. You pay for what they produce, because the fact that we have converted work to time is irrelevant. Interesting question for you. I always mention this. So let's have a theory for you. I've got 2 lawyers. They charge on time, right?
Yeah.
And so I ask 2 lawyers to write me a paper. One takes half an hour and one takes an hour. Let's assume they are word for word the same. Why do you pay the person who took an hour to write the paper twice as much as the person who took half an hour.
Well, it sounds like it's a bit of a unfair deal, right?
Well, it is, but lawyers charge in 6-minute blocks. So that's theoretically what can happen. Now, I use that, it's an extreme example, but what I'm trying to point out is the value is not the time, the value is the output. So once you stop thinking in terms of time, so I'm not paying people for a day they don't work.
Yeah, I think this is the misconception. I think
that's right. I never was.
Yeah.
I am actually focusing on how much did they produce in 5 days, and if I can get them to produce the same in 4 days, I am not worse off. I am the same. If in fact, as what happens, they will produce more than they did in 5 days, in 4 days, I am even better off, because I have seen my productivity and profitability statistically will go up 30%. So actually the business makes more money by asking its employees to work more efficiently in a whole variety of ways, but work less. And that's why this works. If you always think in terms of time, you will never understand why it does work.
I'm pretty sure that you're going to come back, because this is evolving as we speak. And I would love to hear from you. One of the things that I believe in is to try and to see how it goes. Tell me why someone listening should employ the 4-day week in their company today.
Well, I think it's very simple. It is that what's the worst that can happen? I think that the evidence suggests that your productivity and profitability will go up. The evidence suggests that your staff will become more engaged, and that healthier and happier staff are generally more productive. So why wouldn't you try it? Quite often, I think it's Roosevelt said, we've nothing else to fear but fear itself. And also Henry Ford has the phrase that said that, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. So often we talk ourselves out of doing this. This is purely an idea that says, why don't you challenge your preconceptions over how your business works? And simply by challenging preconceived ideas, engaging your workforce in the journey, you will end up with a better business, even if you don't, in the end, continue with a 4-day week. So why wouldn't you do it?
How can people reach out to you or find your book?
Well, go on the website, www.4dayweek.com. You will find piles of stuff there. We always had a policy that said we shared everything. You'll see the research reports. You can obviously buy the book on Amazon. You can order it online. And I'm always happy to have conversations with people, because at the end of the day, you don't get many chances to change the world. This just happens to be mine.
It's been great having you, Andrew. I appreciate your time, and all the best.
Thank you.